And we are back on the 0 Hour. This is Richard RJ Eskow. A lot of us have been following the Fight for 15 movement with great interest now for some years. That movement has been an encouraging grassroots development, fighting for a $15 minimum wage around the country. Our next guest has researched the impact of that movement, what that movement has actually won so far. Yannet Lathrop is a researcher and policy assistant at the National Employment Law Project, NELP. She came there from the Michigan League for Public Policy, and she researches just this sort of issue. The NELP has released a new report, Fight for 15, 4 years, $62 billion. So, Yannet, first of all, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
By reading your headline, I guess I tipped your critical finding right away. But first of all, tell us how you did this report.
Well, it's a little, I'll give you a short answer. What we did was take the research that had been, or the analysis that had been done for various campaigns that were having, that were trying to reach a 15 or any other level of minimum wage over the federal minimum wage. So we took many of those studies and we used that to come up with an increase per 1% increase in the minimum wage. So it's a little complicated. So we used that and then we plugged in some numbers and came up with basically a formula to standardize the wage increases that way. I can go into detail about that if you like, but maybe you would be more interested in other parts of the report.
Yeah. No, I mean, we get the gist of it. Obviously, you've got to correct for, when a pay increase might have begun and all those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. Now, your report says, and I'm looking at it now, the data brief now, it says that since the Fight for 15 launched in 2012, low-wage workers have won $61.5 billion in annual raises, and that's through a combination of state and local minimum wage increases together with how employers have responded. So that is, in other words, is that $61.5 billion that's already been paid out, or that's now scheduled to come online at some point as a result of this effort?
It's the latter. Those are increases that are being phased in right now as we speak and will be fully phased in by 2023 for all employers.
So are there specific areas where there were key victories that contributed to this? Is it distributed everywhere? Or were there 2 or 3 key victories that added a lot to this? It's a great number. It's a big number. Were there some key victories that contributed to it?
Well, there were obviously 2 of the main highlights. The landmark legislation in California and New York for 15 make up a significant portion of that $61.5 billion increase. Other key legislation that we point out in the report are the Los Angeles City minimum wage increase, also for 15, San Francisco, Seattle, CTAG, and Washington, D.C. as well, all of them for 15. The $15 legislation has contributed a significant portion of that $61.5 billion.
Which makes sense because these are huge population centers. Large percentages of the population live there. And again, we're talking with Yannet Lathrop from the National Employment Law Project. Now, for everybody who's still, as I am, bummed out about the November election, I wanted to mention one finding here. According to the report, more than 2 million workers won raises in the election when voters approved minimum wage ballot initiatives in Arizona, Colorado, Maine, Washington State, and the city of Flagstaff, Arizona. So it's interesting because we saw Republican Congress, Republican Senate. We saw, Hillary Clinton losing the Electoral College and therefore the presidency. But a lot of voters went for minimum wage increases, right?
They did, and this is the interesting observation about the minimum wage is that even in red states like Arizona, even in purple states like Colorado, the minimum wage really is a popular topic that voters are very interested in approving, and that has happened not only in this election cycle, 2016, but also in 2014. There were about 4 states that passed also minimum wage legislation, including red states like Alaska. So that's it's a I would say this is a popular issue because people really do understand the need for these wage increases, for this type of policy to help people at the bottom of the economy. And, many people know of somebody, or maybe they have a family member, or even a friend or neighbor that is trying to raise a family, support themselves on low wages. And so they understand that there is an economic necessity for raising the minimum wage, and they tend to approve these wages.
Do you see any indication that some other areas of the country might be pushing something similar? I know it's a little bit outside the scope of your report, so you might not know, but do you know if any other states or localities are looking at this right now?
Yes, in fact, there are a few. The ones that I'm thinking of right off the top of my head right now are New Jersey, Massachusetts, Vermont, I believe New Hampshire, and there will probably be some cities also seeking to do the same. Right now, it looks like the wage levels that a lot of these places are looking at is 15, but there may be a few that are a little bit lower. But so this is really interesting that you bring up the election, because obviously it was for many people who are seeking to make changes for the better for working families. The election did seem to be a bit of a letdown, or maybe a major letdown. The minimum wage really is an issue that will continue on regardless of who's in the White House, and it will likely take the minimum wage will be one. Obviously, now that there is a Republican White House, it will be more likely to be done in state and local levels.
In a way, it feels that one of the things people can do, at least for 2 years, we're going to have Republicans dominating Washington, D.C., all 3 branches of the federal government. But one thing that people can do, whether it's in their city or in their state, is fight for a higher minimum wage, right?
Exactly, and again, this is a popular topic. People tend to support it, and it is something that people can do. Advocates, average people can do to boost their own local economies. There are also other possible measures that can be approved in the state and local level, like pay sick days that obviously also really help a lot of low-wage workers and their families. Ban the box to help some of the people that have some criminal records to have better access to jobs, etc. So there are a number of things that can be done at the state and local levels, and that people can actually get behind and help pass.
That's a great point. And, Yannet, I also wanted to come back a little bit to the issues. You talk in this report, in this NELP report, about not only the initiatives, but action by employers to raise their company's minimum pay scales. Talk a little bit more about that, if you would.
Sure. So, one of the strengths of the Fight for 15 has been not just the legislation that has been passed and the ballot initiatives that have been approved by voters, but also the type of pressure that it has put on a lot of employers to start raising their own wage scales. More notorious in the low wage among the low wage employers are Walmart and McDonald's and other sort of fast food and retailers like them. And since the Fight for 15 began, many of these companies have on their own raised the minimum wage without being forced to do so by legislation. And we believe, and I think this is not just a belief that is unfounded, but we believe and we have seen that the pressure that the Fight for 15 has put on these employers is at least part of the reason, if not the reason, for why these employers have been raising their minimum pay. But Walmart and McDonald's are not the only ones. There are a number of other multi-state national companies like TJ Maxx and Target and Gap, and they tend to raise their minimum pay a little bit, not as much as others. But there have been also a number of smaller employers that have raised their wages significantly more. Aetna, for example, went to $16 an hour. Allstate went to 15. Various universities have raised their minimum pay to 15, for example, etc. So there are a number of employers that have done this on their own since the 5 for 15 began, and we know that the pressure from these protests and these actions by low-wage workers have had an effect on employers.
So another thing that people can do is they can let the companies they do business with know that they expect them to pay at least a $15 minimum wage. And the other thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, but are they're being educated, among other things, by the 5 for 15 movement, is that a lot of these huge corporations with enormous profits, including Walmart, including Yum Foods and McDonald's and so on, when they don't pay enough, people need public assistance just to have enough to eat and enough to get by, meaning in effect that the public is subsidizing these corporations in their selfishness. So not only is it the right thing to do to raise the minimum wage because people deserve to earn a living wage, but it's also really saving money for the government that should be spent by these corporations for them to do business.
That's an excellent point. That's very true.
So, okay, this is all, to me, very encouraging stuff. And I guess I would just conclude by saying, what are you going to be looking at next? What are you going to be following over at the National Employment Law Project, or yourself personally? What are your plans for reporting on 5 for 15 going forward?
Well, as long as there's a 5 for 15, we will continue to support that site, and we will continue to look at the type of benefits that it has brought for low-wage workers. Obviously, there will be a number, as we have already mentioned, a number of campaigns in the future, in the next 2 years, that will be at the state and local level, that will need our assistance, that will need the assistance of advocates throughout the country, and of advocates within their own jurisdictions.
Okay, well, great. Well, where can people go to find out more about your organization and its work?
Well, for NELP, you guys can go to nelp.org. We also have a website that is specifically dedicated to the minimum wage, and that is raisetheminimumwage.org.
Okay, great. Well, Yannet Lathrop, policy analyst with the National Employment Law Project, thanks so much for working on this issue, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you so much.
And we will be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.